The Kansas-Nebraska Act and its fake democratic principles led to spectacular violence, both in the territories and in Washington, D.C. So the Compromise of 1850 brought New Mexico and Utah in as territories under the principle of popular sovereignty, meaning the peoples of New Mexico and Utah would get to decide for themselves if they would join the Union as free states or as slave states sometime in the future. Okay. By the time you get to 1854, this logic is applied to the Nebraska territory, which is actually going to be split into two, Kansas and Nebraska. And the idea is that the peoples of these territories will get to decide for themselves, democracy, if they're going to be slave states or free states. Here's the problem. The Kansas and Nebraska territories were part of the lands acquired from the Louisiana Purchase, meaning that as a result of the Missouri Compromise, those were supposed to be forever free territories. But Congress is going to ignore that and say, look, we can avoid civil war by just letting these territories decide for themselves. And really the author of this is Stephen Douglas. Now, this doesn't work out. This leads to spectacular violence as you see a rush both from anti-slavery Northerners and pro-slavery Southerners into the Kansas territory, where they try to get sufficient numbers to steer the vote in favor of slavery or against slavery. They set up rival legislatures. You have actual shootouts along rivers and along creeks. You have John Brown killing his first handful of pro-slavery advocates. So what you have is bleeding Kansas. That's the violence that you get from the Kansas-Nebraska Act. As it turns out, this kind of fake democratic principle of popular sovereignty, all it does is give a really good reason to start killing each other and not solve or avoid the problem of slavery. In fact, it forces the issue of slavery. Now, what about violence back in D.C.? Well, this is going to spark a very famous speech by Charles Sumner, one of the chief anti-slavery advocates in the Senate, all about bleeding Kansas and the wrongs done to Kansas as a result of popular sovereignty. And he's going to directly attack certain senators who are slaveholders from the South. And one of their relatives, Preston Brooks, is going to walk onto the floor of the Senate and nearly beat Charles Sumner to death for the offenses that Charles Sumner committed against his family in this speech. So the temperature is heating up here. In D.C., you have a senator nearly beaten to death on the floor of the Senate. By the way, Preston Brooks is only fined like $300 for this. In Kansas, you have people killing each other to try and decide, will it be free or will it be slave? And all the while, North and South are getting more hardened on the question of slavery. Popular sovereignty was never going to save this country.